I'm Fredrik Gerten in Malmö, Sweden. I'm the filmmaker.
And I'm Leilani Farha in Ottawa, Canada. And I'm the advocate.
That's how it rolls. And today, it's Airbnb, from friend to enemy, or from love to hate. Is that a good title?
The second one, love to hate. That's too harsh. We don't want to hate. We want to bring them along or something, but not hate.
No, but I mean, that's something if you listen to people out around in cities around the world, a lot of people are actually started to hate something that we actually loved in the beginning.
True.
I think that's
true.
It covers something. So this is our third episode. The first one, we talked about the monster.
Yep.
And the monster as this big cloud of investors that are buying up our city, invading our cities and turning our homes into rent-producing units.
Correct. Financial instruments.
Exactly. And last week we talked about why are people so angry? Why are people so angry?
Well, lots of reasons. Mainly because of the monster and the monster's brothers. Causing
also maybe how... Yeah, also partly because and this is something we really learned while doing the documentary film Push, where Leilani Farha is the main character. Leilani was the UN Special Rapporteur on Adequate Housing. Now she stepped down, but she actually stepped up to be the global director of The Shift, which is an association that is also taking on financialization of housing on a global scale.
That's right.
A lot of member cities coming in, and it's really an interesting thing to follow. People are angry, and because when they solved the financial crisis, they actually, instead of helping the homeowners, they gave them money to the financial players, and they took over. They could buy all these undervalued assets for them. They call it, for us, it's our homes, our houses where people live. So that is something that has been shaking the world, and shakes the world extra much right now during the COVID crisis. The last financial crisis, we're right now in a new one, was in 2008. Just 1 year before, there was some guys in San Francisco, 3 guys.
That's right.
Tell me about them.
Brian, Nathan, and Joe, 3 guys in San Francisco who were part of the gig economy. They were, having short-term contract jobs and having a really tough time living in San Francisco and paying their rent. And they were trying to figure out, how to make ends meet. There was a big conference, I can't remember what it was, but a big conference bringing in tons of people from outside into San Francisco. And these 3 guys thought, hey, we have an apartment and we have an air mattress for camping. Why don't we blow up that air mattress and rent it out while people are in the city, looking for hotel rooms, etc. So they did that, and they charged $80 a night. And I think they had, 3 people. And that began the story of what was called Air Bed and Breakfast and is now known as Airbnb. So it was a simple idea to make money to help these guys pay their rent. They were recently graduates from design school, actually. So
yeah, so cool art students, basically.
Yeah.
And now I saw that this Brian Chesky, he's now worth $3.1 billion.
There you go.
And so it's been quite a good ride for Brian, born in 1981. So he's been doing fine, and we've been reading all of these success stories because we love success stories.
Absolutely.
We really love them. The only problem is that there is like another side to the coin, and this is something we met when working on Push, and of course you also in your work, we've seen it. But I mean, I have when Airbnb came, I was so happy. My first day was at a home in Los Feliz in Los Angeles when I was shooting a film called Big Boys Gone Bananas.
Okay.
And it was an actors couple. They were renting out the unit. They were going to Vermont to visit her parents for 2 weeks, and we met them. And they were, we're leaving now, but you take, if you want, there's wine. Right. Here is like the The fridge was full of food.
Yeah.
It was really nice. We really came to a home, and it was such a good feeling.
Why were they renting? Why were they renting it out?
Because I mean, they needed the money, or they could make some extra money while they were away for 2 weeks. But it was like just, so it wasn't really a business. It was something that could help them a little bit. And I stayed in Paris at some small flat. You really came into the neighborhood. It's like such a good feeling that you are actually part of a neighborhood. You go to the market, you buy your own food,
Absolutely.
and you cook in a home, and there is everything. There is olive oil. If you have in a hotel with some kind of a kitchenette, there's never anything. So it's so hard to cook. But if you come to a functioning home, you have salt and pepper, you have all the different herbs, it's like it's a very cool thing. So I mean I really loved Airbnb when it came. But then I just a few years later, I was suddenly somewhere, I think in Italy, Rome or so, also for a job, and I noticed that the apartment was totally empty. There was nothing. There was nobody living there. So you could feel that this was kind of quite quick. It turned into a business.
That's right. I think, too, when it first started, I could be wrong, but some of those people who were renting out an extra room in their apartment or going away for 2 weeks and renting to you, I think there was a pride in city. So the person felt good about their own city and wanted to share that side of the city with a newcomer, a tourist, etc. And I do think that has changed entirely. But I think, I mean, I hope I'm not romanticizing how it originated. But it seemed to me that there was some sense of, like in your case, the actors, renting out their place to a director, a documentary film director. There's something super nice about that, and not business transaction,
We were just sitting and had a glass of wine and talked about films, and it was really nice. So then when we met in Toronto when shooting Push, like the very first steps in the making of that film, I think a day or two before you arrived to Toronto, I saw in a newspaper that was going to be a manifestation in Kensington Market. Kensington Market is a very iconic Toronto neighborhood where it's a old Latino marketplace, like a lot of small restaurants and bars. And it's funky, hippie-ish.
Yep. Secondhand clothing stores, groovy little cafes.
A nice place to be. And there's also a fighting community that actually tries to defend the values of the market. So we were marching with a group of people, with bands playing, and because they always have music, it's a very good resistance culture around that market. But then we landed in a small alleyway where there was a guy called John Rose. He had an artist space in the basement, and on top of that was a building full of, small rental units where students were living and, young people. And he tells us a story about how the building was taken over and suddenly everything changed. So let's listen to a little clip from we made for Push. It didn't make it into this final film, but let's check it out.
New owner came and took possession of the building and basically started kicking everybody out, like very forcefully.
Like what do you mean forcefully?
The very first day they ever came to the building, they brought some thug-style people, and they were breaking locks for the main entrance for the building. They were physically pushing their way into people's apartments upstairs.
Like, was their purpose to intimidate and get people to leave? Like, what was their...
Yeah, I think that is essentially their entire goal.
The guy in the hat is the trespasser.
Yep, and see, he's running around, he's trying to videotape us. They're just looking for anything they can do to...
He entered your place?
Yes. Yeah. And
how did, he knocked on your door and said,
he had a key and he opened the door, and this is right after they had illegally changed the locks.
They changed the locks and then they used their key and enter your...
Yeah.
But how did you have a key to the place?
I took I called a locksmith in to make a key that fit the lock.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. I felt like I was living some story that you hear
Yeah,
about
yeah,
something
yeah.
that happens in a third world country. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, this is right here in Toronto where people are very civil. This doesn't fit the world that I live in. All of a sudden now there's going to be 36.
Yeah.
There's going to be 36 Airbnb ghost hotel rooms up there.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with Airbnb if you're sharing your house. But if you got a bunch of houses or you're kicking entire people out of a neighborhood so that you can run hotels, that's a different thing.
Yeah, that was kind of a brutal place, and I mean, imagine that you have a new landlord, and then he hires thugs to come in and change all the locks, and they were actually successful kicking people out, saying you have to leave.
Yeah.
They told people. This guy John Rose, he fought it in court. So they actually, in the end, they have to pay him. But it was like he was really traumatized by this fight. So it's not easy because they were also tough people.
I mean, I've heard lots of stories too in Toronto of just everyday tenants being told by the landlord that the landlord wants to use their unit for personal use. You can evict someone for personal use. So then they evict for personal use, but in fact, the intention is to use the unit or many units for Airbnb. So this relationship between tenancy, eviction, and Airbnb is really a very close relationship and obviously hugely traumatic. John Rose, when I was interviewing him, I mean, he was traumatized by this. It had deeply affected him, obviously. And it wasn't just his place to live. It was also where he's an artist and he was creating in that space. And so, I mean, his entire life would have changed if he had to move from that place. And for what?
Yeah. In the end, he moved out anyway. Right. But so tell me about Toronto and Airbnb. What is the story right now?
Well, it's a good news story from the point of view of tenants. The city wanted to regulate Airbnb, and as is common for Airbnb, they pushed back and decided to litigate. And it has been litigated through, and the regulations of Airbnb hold. So it is being regulated in Toronto. There's a certain, number of days. You can't rent out more than a certain number of days per year. I think it's 30 or 60. I'm sorry, can't remember. And they're being regulated. I think there's a list, they have to be documented.
But there are some really good activists also in Toronto, the Fair B&B, the Fair B&B movement. They've been really key in this fight, I think. They've been really...
they were absolutely key to it, and bringing forward evidence at the hearings, showing, demonstrating that this was having a negative impact on tenants for sure. So, I mean, it's a victory, but that's happening around the world, actually. When you start digging, where are there regulations about Airbnb? It's everywhere, actually.
Yeah. But I mean, I was thinking of when we found out this, I mean, we got deeper into the Airbnb realities. It made it hard for me to stay in Airbnb. So I found out the only way I could do it was to stay in somebody's home.
Yes.
Somebody who was actually living there. So it's... And we were shooting Push again when I was back in Toronto, and I was living with this guy, and I had to pass his bedroom and down a stair before going to the toilet. It was like, of course, it's not so comfortable, but I mean, it's still much cheaper than to stay in hotels. And, we are low budget people, so it's not easy. And I guess for you, you were somewhere in Vancouver, and your assistant, not you, had gotten you an Airbnb.
That's correct. Yes. In fact, I mean, it's an interesting story. It was I was out in Vancouver and I was researching the financialization of housing. It was before I'd written my report, before I really knew anything. I went out to Vancouver. There was a big conference going on. All the academics and thinkers on financialization were there. So I went there so I could meet with them all. And my assistant, we had a line item in our budget. We had X number of dollars per night for a hotel. She could not find a single hotel in a location that was proximate, to where my interviews were. So she booked me an Airbnb. And I actually spoke with the fellow who was renting out the Airbnb. And by this time, it was his business. It was how he was making his entire income. So he was buying, and this is where we get into one of the more negative aspects of Airbnb. He was buying up what he called B grade. It's like undervalued properties that need to be fixed up. So he would buy them, fix them up, and then just rent them out as Airbnb. And why that's bad is he's eating into what could be affordable housing, or at least rental housing for people who actually live in the city on a long-term basis. And you start seeing now studies coming out that there's no doubt Airbnb eats up long-term housing options, and we have a housing crisis. We need those long-term options. So from my perspective, that's a big problem.
But it's interesting that, Airbnb went from being this kind of charming new kid on the block to this really big, arrogant guy. And when cities started to find out that Airbnb was actually causing problems, because suddenly there was like 25% and more of the rental stock in many cities, like in the bigger tourist cities, it was suddenly a huge problem. Palma de Mallorca in Spain, it's like an island. So the people working at the restaurants, hotels, and so on, they are nowhere to stay in the end. So they actually have to ban all short-term rentals because it was... So it became quite quick a huge crisis in cities. But so when the cities approached Airbnb, what did they do? Well, they were sending their lawyers after them. Mm-hmm. So these charming guys were suddenly not as charming as they were in the beginning.
Yeah. And, when I read the story of Airbnb, I think it's an interesting story. I mean, maybe I'm too generous or something, but I sometimes wonder if the business model wasn't imposed on them to some degree. I don't know. I mean, they were looking for investors, and it took them many years. It didn't happen overnight, actually. I think it took them 4 years or so before they started to get any interest. And that, they had to play by certain rules and not maybe their own rules at the outset to get investors to invest in their company. And then it started to be really heavy investors, huge, angel investors, huge investors. So maybe that had something to do with the business model that evolved.
So the poor design students were forced to sell their souls.
I don't know about forced.
And now they end up being net worth 3.1 billion. The one they could do without.
And their business, is valued at billions and billions. But
it's kind of a good business. But now the world is actually now fighting back. When we've been around, we've been meeting a lot of mayors, a lot of local people, and almost everywhere people have been saying, "What are you going to do with Airbnb? They are like killing my town." Mm-hmm. It's been the story we've heard from city to city to city. Not only big cities. I mean, there's been big stories now of Venice, for example. Venice says, we want to be a town. Venice had like 150,000 inhabitants, suddenly down to 50,000. 100,000 people are out. And now when the crisis is on, people kind of feel, wow, we get our town back. But still, most of these properties are in the hands of investors from everywhere. There was a good story coming up right now, and it's Amsterdam, the city of canals.
Yes.
The mayor, female mayor, she really came out with a strong hit on Airbnb. She's banning all short terms in the canal districts in the center of town. So, and it's not only going after the rentals, also the shops, because she said, we want people to come and visit a city of people.
Yeah.
We don't want people come to an amusement park. Our city has been turned into something we don't want it to be. So Amsterdam is actually going after also shops, tourist shops, and this is happening also in Venice. They want, because when there are too many tourists, the local shops they lose their clients.
That's right.
So in the end, you can't buy your bread. You can't, or whatever you can buy will be priced for tourists, and the locals can't afford it.
I think Amsterdam is an interesting case too, because I think they originally were regulating Airbnb the same as some other cities. You know, you can't rent out more than 30 days. And they were still finding something like 1 in 15 homes in Amsterdam were Airbnb. So then they took this further measure. The mayor took this further measure of actually banning in certain districts in the center. And I think that's really interesting. In other words, some simple regulations may not be enough, and you know, so she had to take this further step. And you've already mentioned a few other places where banning had to be done to preserve the city and life in the city for local residents.
Yeah, and you saw that they also have a fine in Amsterdam if you break the rules, and that is 20,000 euros.
Yeah.
So it's expensive. And they're banning in the center now, but so you can still do Airbnb outside in the bigger circuit, but it's only for 30 days
That's
a
right.
year.
Heavily regulated.
So then you're down to what I met in the beginning. We are going on holiday. Let's rent our home out so we can get some extra money, which is that's fair Airbnb, I would say.
And I like what the mayor said, because she said, and we're going to keep our eye on these other districts. And if we have to ban in other districts, we'll ban in other districts. So if the regulations don't work in those districts outside of the center, then she's ready to continue with her ban. So it's a very strong position she's adopted, and it's obviously very protective of local residents, which is I think what a mayor's role is, in fact. And I mean, for me as an advocate on the right to housing, this raises a lot of human rights issues around, you know, should people be pushed out of their homes for temporary accommodation? Should housing stock be used for temporary accommodation and not for long-term rentals? You know, these are, for me, these are human rights questions, actually.
And you are the advocate.
I'm the advocate. Yeah. But one thing we didn't really talk about, when you look, there's an irony in the Airbnb model, of course, because it started with these guys trying to pay their own rent and using this model to pay their own rent. And now they've created a business that is making rents unaffordable in some cities. That it's shown in New York and London, for example, the pressure that Airbnb puts on the entire market. But also the fact is that it's no longer just like the average person, right, who's renting out the room in their home. There are major investors involved in this, buying or renting huge number of units, and they're the top earners at Airbnb. It's not the mom and pop who are renting out their room. They're the lower earners. The big earners in this are the ones who are investing a lot of money, buying up a lot of units or renting out a lot of units.
That's true. And when we were in Barcelona, you were there as a UN Special Rapporteur, and you were meeting with the mayor of Barcelona, Ada Colau, and there was also, like, the first meeting, really putting off your initiative, the shift. And then there was lunch with the mayor, and you actually asked her a question about how do Blackstone and the Airbnbs react when the city is getting tough on them. Let's listen to Ada.
I'm interested to know how the investors, the vulture funds, the hedge funds, Airbnb are reacting to what you're doing.
Airbnb primero reaccionó muy duro, ¿no? Muy agresivo, porque no soportan la idea de que les digan que les van a regular.
There are some groups acting like authentic mafias right now.
So there is, Leilani says, Ada Colau says that Airbnb, they really don't like to be regulated.
That's right.
So that was like the first reaction. It actually became a legal war between the city and Airbnb, and that's also a global pattern. Airbnb has been in legal battles with other cities, but the mayor of Barcelona teamed up with the mayor of London and the mayor of Paris, and then they together could be a little bit stronger opposition towards Airbnb. Airbnb were suddenly forced to share the information about the people, renting out their homes and so on. So they got more information and a little bit stronger, but it took them some time, and they actually threatened them with a big fine. In the end, they settled with them. But this, then we hear a deputy mayor, he's saying about they act like real thugs.
Yeah.
And this is like the pattern we have from Toronto. You know, the thugs go from one side, and then what we saw in the building in Barcelona, there was only one tenant left in the building, very close to Las Ramblas in the middle of town. So they've been kicking out every tenant. People have been living there for ages. They were kicking them out, a very rundown street, but where poor people were living. And now it was all about to be an Airbnb hotel. So so this is like a story we've seen of really this. There's so much money into it, so it also becomes aggressive in a new way, and it's a bit scary.
The fellow we met in Barcelona, who was the only guy still and his family living in this building that really had been purchased to be converted into a short-term rental. I mean, the only reason he was able to stay there, this is interesting to me, is that he had a longer-term lease. So his lease was, let's say, 5 years long, and he was at the beginning of it in year 2. And so he could use the lease to keep himself there, which suggests to me that there's a real role for some kind of other tenant protections besides regulating Airbnb. There is probably some role.
He also had the protection of an activist group called PAP.
That's right. Very strong
which
group.
is a very strong group in Spain that fights
evictions. People
getting evictions of people, which has been a big story in Spain. It still is. People still get kicked out of their homes. Homes that they lost to the banks after the last financial crisis.
That's right.
Very close to Barcelona, on the other side of the peninsula, we have Lisbon.
Yes, I was wondering if you might mention Lisbon.
and you were there early on as a UN Special Rapporteur, making an official mission to Portugal. Yes. And I was there actually for a birthday party last summer. And I've been there before. And now it felt like walking around in a death-kissed city. And there were so many empty buildings, so little of the local life was gone. I've been there before, and it was like it was so different, and it was so depressing.
Right.
And when I talked to people in town, it all happened over very few years. The driving factor was, of course, something that you looked into, the golden visa. So Portugal, after to help them out of the financial crisis, they invited global capital to the city. And they did it by offering people citizenship.
That's right.
Or at least, So with some money, you can be a citizen and you enter into Europe. Yeah. The only problem with that was that they came to invite a lot of criminal money from Brazil, from Africa, from Russia, from China. And these guys, they went to buy houses, properties. And there was one story I was told about. There was one big building. There was one old lady staying there. It was a Chinese businessman who bought the building. And this old lady refused to move. Yeah. And then they hired some thugs. Terrible. And they burned down the house.
Terrible.
And the lady died. Oh, my God. And luckily, the perpetrators got caught. And both they and the investor were jailed for a long time, which is good. But it's horrible.
Yeah, terrible.
This extremely aggressive energy.
Yeah. No, and when I was there, that was in 2016. And I mean, it was really clear that Portugal had been told by the regional bank of Europe that it needed to liberalize its housing sector. I mean, it was really very clear. It was one of the terms of their austerity measures. And the golden visas comes out of that. It's a neoliberal approach. It's liberalize your housing sector. And so the way that visa program worked is you would get the visa if you invested a certain amount of money into property. There was also an employment side to it. So you could, start a business. No one did that. When I was there, everyone was just going for the visa through property. But what's so sad, so many of the buildings I visited in Lisbon were being purchased by foreign companies. You say Chinese. I heard of French companies coming in, purchasing.
I mean, this money has no flags,
That's right.
of course.
Yeah,
It goes.
that's right.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
international money, global money.
Yeah.
Buying up the whole building, any tenants that are there being evicted. But in many of the buildings, there were businesses, the small coffee shop or the small food store. And those businesses were being wiped out as well. So not just losing homes for people, but their livelihood. So terrible. And this is supposed to be an help end austerity. It's backward.
And we've seen the same story on Cyprus, on Malta, in many other places. It's the same visa incentives, and have with the same kind of devastating effect for local people. Actually, I'm going to read something from a story in the Independent, the British newspaper, where Fernando Medina, the mayor of Lisbon, is writing. That's actually a few days ago. So he says that, Lisbon is a town of 500,000 people with 4 million visitors a year. So he feels that he needs to turn these Airbnb-style homes into safe rentals. So he really wants to, even to be the city to go in and buy out these guys to get normal people into the city again. And he said, okay, well, we made a lot of money out of the mass tourism, but now we have to turn it around. We want the city to be also for essential workers and their families that have been forced out. We want them to come back to the town. And he want to get the lifeblood of the city back again. So this is exactly what people talks about in Amsterdam, and we heard it from Barcelona. So now they're really, and he want to prioritize affordable housing for the hospital staff, transport workers, teachers, and all these people who have been forced out. And which also makes me happy. He says that he's also going to invest a lot in bike lanes, so people can commute to work without using a private car. So there are some good things happening now these days. So big shout out for the mayor of Lisbon.
Yes, we have to make sure he becomes part of the shift. Absolutely. I really love it. I think in that article, he also talks about the older people who have been evicted or pressured with eviction, so that holiday homes can be put there instead. And he said, so we've started a program to ensure they can stay in their homes and that they don't lose their deep-rooted ties to the city. I thought that was so nice, and I agree with that. Obviously, that is human rights compliant, and that is in fact, that's their obligation, in fact, to do that. So I was super happy to read that. I think it's bold.
Cool. You know what? We've been talking for more than 33 minutes, which means that people say that podcasts shouldn't go on forever.
True.
And so
short attention spans.
No, I'm sure our audience is like, they have been through worse. But anyway, we try to be good. So now I know Airbnb. Yeah. It's not only Airbnb. There's also other names of short-term renters. We have Booking. We have Expedia, Hotels.com,
VRBO,
and on and on and on and on and on. A lot of local names and so on. But people still say I'm going to my Airbnb. So it's like it's been the name
catch-all.
of it.
Yeah,
it is. Yeah, but anyway, so Airbnb, the company, was about to go public.
Correct.
Now making IPO, as they say in financial lingo. Yes. Just before the COVID crisis, they were valued to $31 billion. Some people thought they were even worth $40 billion. And now the poor guys, it's not going so good because the COVID crisis and the cities are fighting back. So they might only get, $27 billion out of the IPO. So poor guys, it's time to suffer.
I'm crying. I'm crying for them. Yes, I'm really crying.
You were actually sent me a Twitter thread the other day with an American researcher he was looking into some kind of app where you can find rentals.
That's right.
And he checked numbers of rental put up the last 7 days, and he could see a trend all over the U.S., not only in big cities, also a lot of small cities, that the number of rentals available were now, it just
skyrocketing.
shoots out, skyrockets.
Yep.
So it's obviously that a lot of Airbnbs and short terms are now going out to normal renters. It's of course also students and so on that are not going to the universities. There are many different factors, but the COVID crisis is a very good moment for cities to fight back, obviously, and for normal people to get a home again where they don't have to travel for hours.
Yep.
So
absolutely,
this is kind of interesting.
In London, someone tracked it. In the week of March 16th, there was a 45% increase in the number of long-term rental listings. 45% increase. Apparently now you can actually live in London. It's almost affordable. Imagine. That's because of Airbnb.
But then I read Brian Chesky again, and he says, okay, traveling will never go back as it was before. People will not flock into the big tourist capital, so it will be a new trend.
Right.
So he's already there, so he can see now people will travel more local. So their business is moving out to the countryside, which it might be good. So it might be good, but it's he is not crying all the way to the bank. He's happy at the bank, and so they're also changing the business model because they can see that cities are fighting back, and they have been a part of destroying the cities. But I mean, it's the COVID crisis that it changes this. It's not Brian Chesky and his friends who suddenly say, "Oh, now we are super rich. Now we can start to do good stuff."
No, there was no awakening.
Now we can be. There was not really an awakening, and I think if you, I mean, I could be happy for people who's created this sharing economy, the gig economy. It sounded so beautiful. A lot of people said, you have to make a film about the sharing economy. But this sharing is like, come on. I love the Uber app because it's so practical. You book a taxi in Moscow, in Cape Town, in Bogota, in Santiago de Chile, everywhere. But it's also takes out money from the local market. So never in history we have somebody sitting in San Francisco making money of a driver in Johannesburg, South Africa. Yeah. So it is something with this gig economy. I mean, we have all these people biking around with food and the big rucksacks with ugly clothing. Suddenly there's somebody in far away who makes money of that sweat.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely. I mean, it's such a misnomer, the sharing economy. Only a certain number of people are benefiting. It's not being shared. We know that Uber drivers don't make enough money to live off of. We talked about that before. Uber drivers having to live in their cars to make a living, etc. But I have to say I have a particular concern for Airbnb, of course, because my area is human rights and housing is a human right. And it's recognized as a human right. Governments have signed and ratified fancy treaties saying that they're committed to it as a human right. And so the question is, are governments doing enough to ensure that actors like Airbnb aren't jeopardizing that right? So that's where I sort of, while I have obviously labor concerns around Uber, et cetera, I have particular human rights concerns around Airbnb and how they're functioning. And it's not to say, I mean, Airbnb actually has done some interesting good things, sort of social responsibility type things. They've worked with migrants and provided housing for migrants, and they've done some stuff with around violence against women during the pandemic. But that doesn't mean that they don't still need to be regulated to comply with human rights.
That's my advocate, the filmmaker and the advocate. I like that title. It's a little bit funny, but anyway. So this was our third podcast.
It was.
Do you feel like you're getting into it a little bit?
It's great.
Yeah, it's we're still learning.
Absolutely.
To be honest, we are learning. Yeah. So, but we might improve. We might. So Leilani, you're famous from like the big star of the documentary film Push.
Yes.
That was released a year ago, and it's actually got a US release date, 4th of September. It's still halted in some countries due to this stupid virus. But we are more and more organizing screenings where people get codes sent to them so they can watch it with their community, and then they can have a Zoom panels. We're doing that more and more. So it's kind of it's not totally dead,
Not at
but
all.
it's tough.
Not at all, and it's
No.
totally relevant to today. So
Yeah. And if you can actually watch the film online in most countries, and you go to the website pushthefilm.com, or you go to our company site wgfilm.com, where you can also see other films. And if you want to follow me on Twitter, by my name, or if you want to follow Leilani on Twitter, you should, and that's Leilani Farah. So it's I would say let's keep talking to each other. And Leilani, thank you for today. And are you walking your dog by the river again? You don't go anywhere.
Yeah,
do
I
you?
can't go anywhere but the river. Been there, done that this
Yeah.
morning.
Yeah.
No, it's
I go to the sea, but right now Swedish summer means that it can be really nice, but it can also be really wet and windy. And now we have the wet and windy.
poor
so
you.
I will go to the sea, but I will get wet before I arrive to the
Well,
water.
I'm
That's
in a heat
complicated.
wave. People will be surprised to know Ottawa, Canada, heat wave,
Okay.
35 degrees. Thanks,
Oh
Frederick.
my God! Go to the river and let's talk about the next chapter. I think we can do something cool.
Absolutely.
And until then, ciao ciao.
Ciao.